When the note Whitney hit that night soared so high it made Mariah Carey stop singing mid-verse, nobody in Madison Square Garden knew they were witnessing the greatest vocal showdown in music history. What happened next would forever change how these two legends saw themselves in each other. If you're loving this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below sharing your favorite Whitney or Mariah moment. It was December 15th, 1998 at the VH1 Divas Live special. Whitney Houston, the undisputed queen of vocals for over a decade, was preparing to share the stage with a young powerhouse who had been turning heads with her 5-octave range. Mariah Carey, just 28 years old, had already proven she could hit notes that seemed impossible for human vocal cords. But that night, something unplanned was about to unfold that would test both women in ways they never expected. Whitney stood in her dressing room at Madison Square Garden, running through her vocal exercises. Her voice coach, Gary Katona, listened intently as she effortlessly moved from her rich lower register to her signature power notes. "Whitney, you sound incredible tonight," he said, adjusting his glasses. "That high C you just hit was perfection." But Whitney wasn't satisfied. She'd heard whispers around the industry about Mariah's whistle register, notes so high they were almost inaudible to the human ear. Tonight she wanted to remind everyone why they called her the Voice. Down the hall, Mariah was dealing with her own pre-show nerves. She'd been a Whitney fan since childhood, owning every album, studying every vocal run. Meeting her idol should have been a dream come true, but the media had been pushing this narrative of rivalry between them for years. The press constantly compared their styles, Whitney's gospel-trained power versus Mariah's technical precision. The Whitney versus Mariah headlines had created a tension that neither woman had asked for. "Mariah, you ready for this?" asked her vocal coach, Bing Futch. She was doing her warm-ups, her voice dancing through scales that most singers couldn't even attempt. "I just want to honor her tonight," Mariah replied, her voice carrying genuine reverence. "Whitney paved the way for all of us. I'm not here to compete with her." But deep down, Mariah knew that tonight felt different. The energy was electric, charged with an unspoken challenge that neither woman could ignore. When the show began, both women delivered flawless solo performances. Whitney commanded the stage during her rendition of "I Will Always Love You," her voice soaring with the kind of emotional depth that had made her a global superstar. The crowd was in awe, reminded once again why Whitney Houston was considered one of the greatest vocalists of all time. But then it was Mariah's turn, and she chose "Vision of Love," showcasing the vocal agility and range that had made her famous. Her whistle notes pierced the air like silk ribbons, delicate yet incredibly powerful. But the real magic was about to begin when they took the stage together for an unscripted duet of "I Know Him So Well" from Chess. What the audience didn't know was that this wasn't supposed to happen. The producers had planned separate performances, but Whitney had suggested the duet backstage. "Let's give them something they'll never forget," she had whispered to Mariah during a brief encounter in the hallway. As the song began, both women sang beautifully, their voices blending in perfect harmony. Whitney took the first verse, her voice rich and soulful, telling the story with the kind of emotional authenticity that made listeners feel every word. Mariah followed with the second verse, her voice lighter but equally powerful, adding her own unique interpretation to the melody. The audience was mesmerized, witnessing two of the greatest voices of their generation sharing the same space, the same song, the same moment in musical history. But then something shifted. As they reached the bridge, Whitney began to improvise, adding runs and riffs that weren't in the original arrangement. It was subtle at first, just small embellishments that showcased her vocal prowess. Mariah responded in kind, her voice dancing around Whitney's, creating a conversation between two masters of their craft. The band, led by musical director Rob Mounsey, instinctively followed their lead, creating a musical foundation for what was becoming an impromptu vocal battle. But wait, you won't believe what Whitney did next. Whitney smiled at Mariah and then did something completely unexpected. She began to climb higher, note by note, her voice reaching into her upper register with a power and precision that sent chills through the arena. It wasn't aggressive or competitive, it was playful, like she was inviting Mariah to join her in the clouds. The audience began to realize something special was happening. This wasn't just a duet anymore. It was becoming a celebration of vocal excellence. Mariah's eyes lit up with understanding. She recognized the invitation and accepted it gracefully. Her voice began its own ascent, moving into her signature whistle register with ease. The notes she produced were so pure, so crystal clear, that they seemed to float above the music like angels singing. The contrast was breathtaking. Whitney's powerful, full-bodied high notes against Mariah's ethereal, almost otherworldly whistle tones. The other performers backstage had stopped what they were doing. Celine Dion, Aretha Franklin, and Shania Twain all gathered around monitors, watching in stunned silence. "My God," Aretha whispered. "They're both reaching heights I've never heard before." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had heard every great singer of the past 5 decades. Celine, herself no stranger to vocal excellence, stood with her hand over her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. "This is what we all dream of," she murmured. Two voices becoming one force of nature. Behind them, backup singers and crew members had formed their own impromptu audience. Sound engineers were frantically adjusting levels, trying to capture every nuance without distortion. The lighting crew had instinctively dimmed everything except the spots on Whitney and Mariah, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that matched the otherworldly sounds filling the arena. In the audience, veteran music critics who had covered thousands of performances were scribbling notes with shaking hands, knowing they were witnessing something that would define their careers. A young vocal student in the balcony would later say that seeing this performance changed her life's direction, inspiring her to become a vocal coach rather than just a performer. Even the seasoned musicians on stage were struggling to maintain their composure, witnessing something that felt like a once-in-a-lifetime moment. The drummer had stopped playing entirely for several measures, afraid his rhythm might interfere with the magic happening at center stage. The bass player later admitted he'd never been so simultaneously inspired and intimidated by what the human voice could achieve. Whitney pushed higher, her voice reaching notes that most sopranos couldn't attempt. Her technique was flawless, her breath control phenomenal. Years of gospel training and classical technique had prepared her for this moment, though she probably never imagined it would happen on live television in front of millions of viewers. The camera caught the concentration on her face, the slight furrow of her brow, as she focused all her energy on maintaining perfect pitch and tone. Mariah responded by entering what vocal experts call the superhead voice, a register so high it's almost pure whistle. Her notes floated above Whitney's like counterpoint in a Bach composition, creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible. The technical skill required was extraordinary, but what made it magical was that neither woman was showing off. They were sharing a moment of pure musical joy, pushing each other to reach heights they might never have attempted alone. The audience was completely silent now, afraid that any sound might break the spell. People were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they were witnessing. In the VIP section, music industry executives sat with their mouths open, knowing they were watching history being made. Even the camera operators seemed mesmerized, the shots becoming steadier, more focused, as if they too understood the gravity of the moment. But the most incredible moment was still coming. Both women seemed to reach their limits simultaneously, their voices straining at the very edges of human vocal capability. Whitney's note was pure power, full and resonant, while Mariah's was like a laser beam of sound, precise and unwavering. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might have reached an impasse, both singers having given everything they had. That's when Whitney did something that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of pushing for one final note, she began to descend, her voice creating a beautiful melodic line that invited Mariah to join her. But rather than matching Whitney's melody, Mariah continued to hold her whistle note, creating a suspended harmony that seemed to hang in the air like a musical question mark. And then, in a moment of pure inspiration, they both began to sing the same note in unison, not competing anymore, not trying to outdo each other, but finding a place where their voices could meet. Whitney's powerful head voice blended perfectly with Mariah's whistle register, creating a sound that was somehow both voices and neither voice at the same time. It was pure magic, the kind of musical moment that gives you goosebumps and makes you believe in the power of human expression. The song ended with both women looking at each other with genuine admiration and respect. They embraced on stage, and the hug lasted longer than protocol usually allows. In that embrace, years of media-manufactured rivalry melted away, replaced by mutual recognition of each other's extraordinary gifts. The audience erupted in applause that lasted for nearly 3 minutes, a standing ovation that seemed to acknowledge not just the performance, but the significance of what they had witnessed. You're not ready for what happened next, but this moment changed everything. Backstage after the show, Whitney and Mariah found themselves alone in a quiet corridor. The adrenaline was still coursing through their veins, the high of that incredible performance making everything feel surreal. "Girl," Whitney said, shaking her head in amazement, "where did those notes come from? I've never heard anything like that whistle register of yours." Mariah blushed, still starstruck despite her own success. "Whitney, you made me reach higher tonight than I ever have before. That's what you do. You inspire people to be better than they thought possible." What followed was a conversation that would change both of their careers and their friendship forever. Whitney spoke honestly about the pressure she'd been feeling as newer artists like Mariah emerged with different styles and techniques. "The industry loves to pit women against each other," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But tonight showed me something different. We don't have to be in competition. We can celebrate each other." Mariah opened up about her own insecurities, how she'd always felt like she had to prove herself worthy of sharing the stage with legends like Whitney. "I grew up listening to you," she admitted. "You taught me that voices could be powerful and vulnerable at the same time. Tonight, singing with you, I felt like I finally understood what my voices meant to do." The two women talked for hours that night, discovering they had more in common than the media had ever reported. Both had struggled with the pressures of fame at a young age. Both had dealt with controlling relationships, and both had used music as a way to express emotions they couldn't put into words. Their conversation revealed the humanity behind the headlines, the real women behind the vocal powerhouses. From that night forward, their relationship changed. Gone was the manufactured rivalry, replaced by genuine mutual support. Whitney would later say in interviews that Mariah's technical precision had inspired her to work harder on her own vocal technique. Mariah credited Whitney with teaching her that power and emotion were just as important as range and agility. The performance became legendary in vocal circles. Voice teachers would show the footage to students, pointing out the different techniques each woman used to reach such extraordinary heights. Whitney's approach was rooted in gospel and R&B tradition, using her diaphragm and breath support to create notes that seemed to come from her soul. Mariah's whistle register technique involved a completely different set of muscles and breathing patterns, creating notes that seemed to defy physics. But what made the performance truly special wasn't the technical achievement, impressive as it was. It was the musical conversation between two artists at the peak of their powers, pushing each other to heights neither could have reached alone. It was a reminder that music, at its best, is about connection and communication, not competition. The media tried to spin the performance as a victory for one singer or the other, but both women refused to play that game. In subsequent interviews, they consistently praised each other and downplayed any competitive aspects of the night. Whitney would say, "Mariah didn't challenge me, she inspired me." Mariah would respond, "Whitney didn't compete with me, she elevated me." The technical analysis of that performance revealed just how extraordinary it truly was. Whitney reached notes in the sixth octave, higher than she'd ever sung publicly before or since. Her highest note that night was approximately an E6, a full step higher than the famous climax of "I Will Always Love You." For context, that's higher than most sopranos sing in classical opera. Mariah's whistle notes reached into the seventh octave, specifically what vocal analysts believe was a G7, one of the highest notes ever recorded by a popular music artist. What made it even more remarkable was the control and musicality she maintained while reaching such extremes. These weren't just athletic feats of vocal gymnastics. They were musical statements that served the song and the moment. But the impact went beyond the technical achievements. The performance changed how the music industry viewed female vocal artists. Instead of constantly comparing women and pitting them against each other, the industry began to recognize that different styles and approaches could coexist and even complement each other. Whitney's soulful power and Mariah's technical precision weren't opposites in competition. They were different colors on the same musical palette. Young singers watching that performance were inspired to develop their own unique voices rather than trying to copy one particular style. Vocal coaches began teaching students that there was no single right way to sing at the highest levels, that excellence could be achieved through multiple paths. The Whitney-Mariah moment became a teaching tool for demonstrating how technical skill and emotional expression could work together. The friendship that bloomed from that performance lasted for years. They would occasionally call each other for advice, share recommended vocal exercises, and even considered recording a duet album together, though it never materialized due to their busy schedules and different record labels. When Whitney faced personal struggles in the 2000s, Mariah was one of the few industry peers who privately reached out with support and encouragement. Years later, when Mariah faced criticism for lip-syncing controversies and vocal struggles, Whitney publicly defended her, reminding critics of Mariah's extraordinary talent and the impossible standards placed on female vocalists. "That girl has one of the most beautiful voices God ever created," Whitney said in a 2009 interview. People forget how hard it is to maintain that level of excellence year after year. The 1998 VH1 Divas performance has been viewed millions of times on video platforms, with vocal coaches, music students, and fans analyzing every note. Comment sections are filled with people sharing how the performance moved them to tears, inspired them to pursue music, or simply reminded them why they love the power of the human voice. It's become a touchstone for discussions about vocal excellence and musical collaboration. But perhaps the most important legacy of that night is the lesson it taught about competition versus collaboration. In a world that often celebrates rivalry and conflict, Whitney and Mariah showed that the most beautiful moments happen when talented people lift each other up rather than tear each other down. Their octave battle became an octave celebration, a demonstration that there's room for multiple queens in the kingdom of music. The performance also highlighted something important about the nature of true artistry. Both women could have chosen to play it safe that night, sticking to their planned arrangements and avoiding any risk. Instead, they chose to be vulnerable, to push their instruments to the limit in front of millions of people. That willingness to take risks, to chase excellence even when failure was possible, is what separated them from good singers and made them legends. Today, vocal coaches still use that performance as an example of what's possible when technique meets inspiration, when preparation meets opportunity, when competition transforms into collaboration. It's a reminder that the highest levels of achievement often happen not in isolation, but in the presence of others who push us to be our best selves. Music schools around the world now include this performance in their curriculum, not just for the technical achievements, but for the masterclass in professional collaboration it represents. At Berklee College of Music, Professor Sarah Mitchell has shown the footage to hundreds of students over the years. "I tell them," she explains, "this is what happens when ego steps aside and artistry takes over." Both women could have chosen to outshine the other, but instead they chose to create light together. The performance has also influenced how modern artists approach collaborations. When Beyoncé and Adele shared the stage at the 2017 Grammy Awards, they specifically referenced this Whitney-Mariah moment as inspiration for how powerhouse vocalists can support rather than compete with each other. Alicia Keys has called it the blueprint for how legends should treat each other. And John Legend once tweeted that watching it reminded him why I fell in love with music in the first place. Contemporary R&B artists like SEA, HER, and Summer Walker have all mentioned studying this performance to understand vocal dynamics and the power of musical conversation. The ripple effects continue to influence new generations of singers who see collaboration as strength rather than weakness, who understand that lifting others doesn't diminish your own light. When Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey took the stage together on December 15, 1998, they thought they were just doing a duet. Instead, they created a moment that redefined what was possible in popular music. A moment that showed the world that when queens support queens, everyone rises higher. The octave battle that wasn't really a battle at all became a masterclass in excellence, friendship, and the transcendent power of the human voice reaching for the heavens. Their voices soared that night, But more importantly, their spirits soared together, creating something more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. In a world full of manufactured conflicts and artificial rivalries, Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey gave us something real. A moment of pure musical magic that reminds us why we fell in love with music in the first place.